Hi, and welcome to the show. Now, this is the first of two shows that is going to delve into the topic of homelessness. Previously on the podcast, we've explored so many midlife themes, and we know midlife is a unique stage where many find ourselves at a crossroads. This might be forced or by choice, and sometimes we're not where we expected to be. But we probably never think we will be homeless. But many that are thought the same too. So, in this episode, I'm speaking to Hilary Bartle, who is the CEO of StonePillow, a charity that was established in 1989 and have supported thousands of people in West Sussex in the UK to restart their lives with independence, dignity, and confidence. Hilary has dedicated over 4 decades to the housing, health, and homelessness sectors, holding esteemed positions within the civil service, local government, and the charitable sector. Collaborating with the entire team at StonePillow, she's spearheading a transformative approach to addressing the root causes of homelessness and implementing innovative service models that effectively prevent and end rough sleeping. I feel this topic is highly relevant for the show because this stage of life can bring unexpected challenges, job loss, divorce, health issues, or financial instability. And I'd like to explore this and these themes in this episode. And who better to do that with than with Hilary? Hilary, welcome to the show.
Lovely to see you, Simon. Great.
Thank you, Hilary. So first of all, Hilary, I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself, really. What drew you to this kind of work in the first place?
I suppose from being very young, I had a huge sense of social justice, probably instilled in me by my parents, and certainly wider family members. I had a lovely auntie who had developed and run a number of homelessness services from the 60s and the 70s onwards, and some of them are still going, even though sadly she's now passed. I was brought up in quite a strong faith-based household, and there was a whole lot of stuff that goes with that about social justice. And then I got involved in working within communities, particularly through youth clubs, through churches, doing volunteering, right from being very young, going out and doing collections for Christian Aid and that sort of thing. And I suppose it just is in there. It's just embedded in me. And it was a natural progression. I started working in communities and homelessness, and had a plan to go to university. I wanted to do drama. I decided to take a year out, despite having a place, and never got there. So since really being 16, 17, I've sort of worked within a homelessness community-based, working particularly with disadvantaged people on housing estates, and that's been my life, and sort of progressed through that, and run everything from 400-bed men's hostels, women's hostels, seen numerous government policies, housing legislation enhanced, changed, and worked my way through in terms of being a direct support worker, so doing very frontline night shelter type work, through to managing services, through to them managing partnerships which focused around bringing health, police, probation, local government, social care all together, to plan better together back in the 90s, really, 90s, before it was even thought about. And really that's what's evolved. Collaboration is at the heart of what I do. Then worked for government, and then moved to working back in the charitable sector as a
So
CEO.
it must be a tough business to work in, if that makes sense, but also highly rewarding.
I think it's inspiring and it's humbling. I'm inspired every day, and I learn something every day through those who I work with, those who we serve. Um, and, I've seen some amazing transformations that people have driven themselves with the facilitation. I see ourselves a bit of a climbing wall. So we are those pegs and we help people climb up that wall. But we can't do it for them. You have to have that energy, that commitment to get up there. And all we can be is that handhold or that step to step on or that facilitation to say reach for that or reach for this. And I think that to me is what makes it inspiring, and that's why I do it. I don't I you know, I find it humbling being with people, and I find it exciting. So every day I'm excited. Some day I'm very stressed being CEO, but mostly I'm excited by opportunity, by change, by my own learning, by my team's learning. So yeah, it inspires me, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
So, Midlife, the podcast is all about midlife, the challenges, the uncertainties, the opportunities that are there. Through a lot of the conversations that I've had so far with people, they are fortunate to be in a position where they are maybe having an opportunity to have a second act and go and do a passion that they had, and all be very positive steps forward, I suppose. But for some, that's not the case in midlife. They find themselves in a position that they did not expect. So when we think of homelessness, I think initially many people think of rough sleepers, but it's bigger than that, isn't it? Tell me, how should we be redefining how we look at homelessness?
I mean, homelessness, people's perception, as you say, is rough sleepers. Someone in a doorway, in a sleeping bag, begging for food or begging for money. Um, that's a tiny proportion of those that are homeless. So, in terms of the whole sphere of homelessness, you've got homeless families, and often, we see men who are homeless with their children because male domestic abuse does exist and they have to flee. And I've met many men with their children, and it's tough for them because most refuges are for women. And there is a recognition now, which I'm really pleased that some men are in that position too. You have men that have been working really hard. I've worked with men who've been very senior directors in organisations and companies, and s- something has happened, often age related, and they are deemed maybe too old for the job. There's youngsters coming up, they're sidelined, and that basically sends them into great anxiety, some mental health stress, and often that actually is something that really tips them over the edge. Families break down, have a nervous breakdown. Often men, and we know that the high rates of suicide among men, particularly young men, but older men as well, because they feel there's no hope, there's no future, families broken down, maybe they've been married for 30 years, but something has triggered this breakdown, and they are sometimes the unseen. We have a lot of people nowadays who young sort of middle-aged men who've been running businesses and end up, because the last thing they own is their van. They may be working in the building industry. The van's the last thing, and they end up sleeping in that because there's nowhere else. They don't own anything else, or it's all gone pear-shaped for them. So, um, there is so many different levels. So what we say is at StonePillow, we don't work with families, so that's something we can't do. We work with young people, young care leaders, but we don't work with children. We work with single people, predominantly, three-quarters are men. And of those, about 66% are men between the ages of 35 and 60, although we do have outliers at either end. And their stories are all different. But the common thing is they have no place to call a home, no place to return to as a home.
Again, sometimes one might have a stereotype image of who someone might be if they're homeless. But again, from your experience, that's not the case, is it? And it can happen to anyone.
It can, absolutely.
Tell me about that.
I mean, I think one of the first men I ever worked with in a service back well into the early 80s was a man who was an Oxford professor. And I had particular interest because my dad went to Oxford, and so I was really interested in this gentleman because he was an Oxford professor. He'd had a breakdown, And my first memory of him was walking around with Tippex thinner up his nose. He was a highly intelligent man, very highly respected professor, but he'd something had happened. He'd had a mental breakdown. But other people I've worked with have been senior directors in the IT industry, people who've been head teachers, people who've been senior police officers. There is no one characteristic. I think people don't see when you're walking down the street, or if you hear about homelessness, it's the backstories. It's those people who've been in the army, who've had big careers, and something has happened. Something has happened and triggered that change, often unplanned, or maybe something. And I think particularly in midlife, both men and women sometimes feel they should have that resilience, and they haven't. They probably a lot of people will sofa surf for a while, and they'll be moving from friend's house to friend's house because friends are very supportive. They've got all these networks. But after about 6 to 9 months, those friends' networks get a bit tired and I get a bit fed up, and there's a bit of, well, you really need to get yourself sorted. And I think what we see is in our services that people who've hit rock bottom, they've tried everything, they've tried to pull themselves out, they've tried a new direction, but the common thread is that they haven't been able to pull themselves through it. And often it's associated with maybe they started drinking a bit too much, and that drink has started taking over, um, or that their mental health is suffering so greatly that they have not been able to motivate themselves or had that support. And we know the pressures of mental health services and hospitals and the general community environment. There isn't that resource now. And once you've exhausted your support networks at home, then you are alone. And men and women of middle age struggle with saying, I need help.
Going back to those triggers, are there any particular triggers that affect people more? Is whether it be losing a job or divorce or something like that. Do you see patterns of those, and are they different with men and women?
Um, I believe so. Looking at the stats and working it for so long. So with men, it tends to be a family breakdown. There tends to be a high proportion where family has broken down, where the man has been asked to leave. Um, and there is a great sense of grief and loss, which isn't dealt with. So they maybe have lost access to their children, and that gives another pressure and another level of grief, although it's somebody else's fault. Um, with women, it tends to be a flip side. It tends to be they have had to leave. Their relationships have been, very unhealthy, very destructive, and it is their last resort for a woman to leave, I believe. And again, they have often lost their children into care or into the care of of a family member. Um, but there are very, very different causes. There's also a very common thread that's starting to develop, which is men who've maybe had a family breakdown or live with parents. And those parents have now died. And because they maybe have been living in either private sector accommodation or being newer tenants with the local authorities, and there's no passing down of that tenancy, that they suddenly find when mother's died, or both parents have gone, they have no right to stay in that property anymore. They're probably in their late 50s, early 60s. And suddenly the home, which has been their family home, is no longer available to them. And because they are not in any priority need, there is no accommodation for them to move to. And that seems to be a common thread that we're starting to see now.
So it really can happen to anyone. Everything you're describing, I would, I couldn't imagine myself being in that situation. But that's probably very arrogant or very naive of me to think that, because who knows what life is going to throw me. Are there any warning signs or things that you can spot, or how can you sort of try to manage a situation if you're in a position where maybe your marriage has broken down and you can see things aren't going quite right, and where you're going to go, are there any things that you can sort of preemptively do, or do you see that with anyone?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to many of our midlife clients, and they say, "I never believed it could happen to me." And that's a really common thing that's said to me. If you talk to many of our clients who've come through and moved through the pathway, their first thing is they never thought it could happen to them. And and I think it's like anything, isn't it? When you're looking at stress, divorce, losing a job, losing a home or moving home, they're the three top indicators of major stress. And you have that, and people don't want to believe it. So they bury their head in the sand. They don't ask for help, or they try and ask for help and the doors are always closed. And if their friends are around them and they rely on friends, but friends can only do so much. And I think it's about one of the big things we try and do at StonePillow is make people aware. So we talk in schools, we talk in colleges, we talk to churches and say, if you are unsure, if you are worried, if about a family friend or anybody, talk to us. Talk to somebody, talk to us, and we might not help you at that moment, but we can signpost you, we can introduce you to somebody. Citizens Advice Bureau, housing authorities, mental health services. Don't be afraid to ask. At the first sign, don't bury your head in the sand. Just take that step and that ask. Because once it mounts up and once that piles on top of you, it becomes harder and harder to ask, and that's when people turn to self-medicating, the alcohol. And it's so easy, I'll just have a glass of beer in the pub and it's 10 pints of beer later. I'll just have a glass of whiskey and it's a bottle and a half later. I'll just have a glass of wine and it's like 2.5 bottles later. And suddenly that's a habit and that's an everyday thing, and it dulls it, but it doesn't solve it.
Yeah, and I guess that just makes the whole situation worse because you are not feeling great about yourself, and therefore you're not in the best frame of mind to be able to look at things. One interesting thing, is it worse now than what it was 5 or 10 years ago? I mean, are we making any progress in supporting people and maybe cutting away the stigma, or is it worse now? Is it better or worse now than what it was 10 years ago?
It's um it's not a clear trajectory. So a lot of it depends on the stresses and strains of the public sectors, quite frankly. We know we've got a massive affordable housing issue, and that's countrywide now. I mean, when I worked up in Manchester, we had a lot of accommodation we could move people into. They may be not ready, but we could have moved people in. However, that's really changed across the country now, and accommodation just simply isn't affordable for some people. We know that cost of living impact is having a huge impact on everybody, and people who were quite affluent are no longer quite affluent, and it's tough. Some people, particularly when they hit midlife, they might be asset rich but cash poor, because their properties are worth a bit, but they can't sell them. But they struggle actually on a day-to-day revenue funded basis. Have they got enough cash in their pocket? I would say, if I'm very honest, it's probably the worst I've ever seen it at the moment. And that's for so many different impacts of public sector. Trouble in getting mental access to mental health. You're looking at time to talk services, having 9-month waiting lists. You're looking at housing registers just being overwhelmed. And so those people who appear fit and healthy and are middle-aged and able to, seem relatively able to, should be able to cope, can't, aren't given any priority. Um, and you do struggle with finding suitable available accommodation and then the wraparound support to go with it, which is very, very limited. And we see, big cuts happening in health. We just look at the waiting times in A&E. We look at the waiting times if you aren't very well, and it just perpetuates this whole pressure on individuals.
Before we move on to what you're doing and the team at StonePillow to help,
Oh,
uh, do does society view homeless men and women differently?
it's tough. I mean, I think society, we had the wonderful Suella Braverman thing saying, well, rough sleeping is a lifestyle choice. Homelessness is a lifestyle choice. No, it's not. It might be the only option for somebody, but it's certainly no one at 16 goes to see the careers officer and says, I'm going to sleep rough when I'm 25, 45, 65. No one does. So it's not an active choice. It's a result of a series of things that have happened. I think there is some people in society think, well, they should pull themselves together and get themselves sorted out. Um, they might see people who sit and drink on the street. Um, People see automatically they're homeless. In many cases, they're not, but they congregate together, and some people who are homeless join in with that. And they do cause problems. So I think that can sway people's opinion. Um, but I think people's hearts are good. And I think people are sad that there are people who are homeless. And I think people recognise that. Um, but there are issues around people. There is some mindset that I view everybody who hasn't got a home, who's homeless, as deserving to have that very basic human right, is somewhere to live, somewhere to stay that's safe and warm, and they can close the door and it's theirs. Yeah, I think there is mixed views. I think probably more kind people than there are unkind people in this world.
Yeah. Well, let's hope so. Let's talk about Stone Pillow then, because when the situation is bad out there, you are creating an environment or space. Tell me how you work and the kind of response, I suppose, that you get when you start to speak to your clients. Are they receptive? Do they welcome your support straight away? Are they resistant because you're trying to help and they don't want? How does Stone Pillow work and really sort of start to make a change for these people?
Well, we have our 5 pillars, and it gives us a framework to work within, and it gives us a framework for our services. So the first pillar is we want to prevent homelessness in the first place. So we have a set of preventative services that work with people who are living in their own homes, where that has become at risk for whatever reason, and we can address some of those risks and help people stop burying their head in the sand and go to Citizens Advice Bureau, negotiate with landlords about repayment of rent, negotiate with utility bills where things have got out of hand, and really start to put the building blocks back in place to give them a secure setting, and not lose the home. That's the big one. We don't want anybody to lose the home. We have a young care leaver service which actually helps prepare 16 and 17-year-olds who are coming out of the care system to build the skills to live independently in society, and to help them be strong and stand on their own 2 feet. And at 18, you've got to live in your own home. That's tough. That's really tough. I did it, but doesn't mean I did it very well. I sort of fought the way through it, and I managed it, but I made so many mistakes. And we're trying to help prepare people for those mistakes, so you
Yeah,
learn from them, you don't sort of
yeah,
collapse under them.
yeah,
And we work with people who are coming out of prison. So people who are due for release from prison, however long the sentences they've been served, and my accommodation for ex-offenders team, they will go in and work with people in prison to prepare them to try and set up flats for when they come out, make sure they're not discharged or released from prison onto the street, which happens 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon used to be the big one. Released from prison, you've got to go see probation officer, you've got to go and see your housing officer, all before 5 o'clock when everything shuts, or 4:30 now in lots of places. So that's changed, but we are now working very much in the prisons to support people. So when they're coming out to something with a support plan and with that connectivity and their benefits set up, and some hope that they're not just hitting a street. So that's a really important pillar for us. And we then have a relief pillar. So should someone find themselves with nowhere to live and on the street, literally, the next day I am not going to have anywhere to live, we have our day services, our hub services in Chichester and Bognor where people can come. And they can turn up there, hopefully prior to that happening, because we can help them much better in preventative ways. But if the case happens and they can turn up there and we can make sure that we hook them in with the right people at the right time to make the right applications to get into temporary accommodation quickly, or if not, try and sort out something for them. If they do end up rough sleeping, we provide the showers, the food, the washing machines, the spare clothes, um, so we can actually really make sure that they are safe and sorted for that for as long as they are in that position. But we are there to support them as well. So they will come into our services, take the basic amenities, but by doing so, they start to engage with the staff on site who are
Yeah.
fabulous. And
Yeah.
we work in a what's called a trauma-informed way. So we don't want, there's no blame, there's no judgment. We don't want to trigger people. We want to work with them. We want to walk alongside them rather than tell them this is what you have to do. So that's our relief pillar. Then we have our recovery pillar where we have accommodation for people through our hostels, supported accommodation, recovery services, women's services. And we are able then to work with people more intensely to get them back on track. And then we also then are able, once they do find accommodation and we've supported them to find accommodation, help them resettle, re-engage back into being independent again, back into those local communities, hooking people in with communities, feeling part of that community again, not ostracised, not judged. And part of that is through our restore pillar, which is not only a pun on the name of our retail outfits, but also the fact that we want to restore lives. That actually, having had a period of time when you've been homeless and been at rock bottom in many cases, how do you rebuild your confidence, your self-esteem, your sense of purpose and hope? And that's what our restore pillar tries to do. And then we do that through partnerships with the university, with great success getting people back into education, and maybe we've never even thought of it.
It sounds a phenomenal job. It's a huge list of things you've just gone through there in terms of what you're providing people. How do your clients respond when you provide so much, when they feel like their world has fallen apart? They didn't expect to be where they are. They were a successful businessman or woman, and they now find themselves in this position, probably feeling pretty low, maybe starting to turn to alcohol a little bit to help them through things. And then you arrive with your team and provide love and support. How do they respond?
I mean, I think sometimes some people grasp it with both hands and run with it. Um, some people take longer, and particularly those people maybe who've been through the care system, who've maybe been quite entrenched in their rough sleeping, maybe who've been on a revolving door, don't trust people. There's a lot of loss of trust when you've been turned away, had doors closed in your face, when you feel socially isolated, disenfranchised. You don't trust people. So there's a big exercise and a big piece of work that staff do in building that trust with individuals, and they do it remarkably well. And often, people can be quite cross at the beginning, very resistant. And, when you're looking at outcomes, to me, a great outcome is somebody who maybe is resistant to registering with a doctor actually registers with a doctor. And that might be we take them to the doctor. It might be because that doctor's surgery have turned them away, you know, because they haven't got an address. I go to the doctor, I haven't got an address. Sorry, we can't register you. Well, I'm not coming back here again. And then we use PO boxes for our day services. So we're able to do that. So actually, some people are really happy. Some people are really resistant. And some people, it's a slow burn. It's just building things up, particularly those with addictions. And then when they're going through that pathway and they see the opportunity and they go through our services into our recovery service, it's inspiring and transformational how they suddenly, you see the light bulb moments and you see people just flourish. And that's what makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
How somebody just goes, "Yeah, I am gonna move forward in my
Yeah.
life, and I am
Yeah.
gonna grasp this, and I'm just gonna fly. I'm gonna be that phoenix rising out of the, ashes," and that's what inspires me.
Did you notice any particular catalysts that help those people? Is it just an overnight thing? The confidence comes back, or is there something else that happens alongside the support that you're giving? Because it's wonderful to hear that that can happen with your support. But is there any common themes that people? Is it getting a job back? Is it just the fact that the doctor will see them, or the fact that you're giving them the time that it gives them the boost, I suppose?
If I'm very honest, I think the when people make a decision to move forward, it's very much around them stopping blaming everybody else, that it's everybody else's fault, and it's actually saying, "Actually, I'm the owner of my own destiny." And and it's hard to get to that stage when you've been battered away, you've been through care, you've been through really difficult, maybe very traumatic childhoods, abusive childhoods. It's very easy to get into that mindset. It's everybody else. I drink because of everybody else. I'm in this position because of everybody else. Um, but what I've seen is when people go, actually, the only person that's going to change it is me. That's when you see change. It's wonderful to see that. And you start to see that spot, as I said, it can be very slow,
Yeah,
it can take years,
yeah,
or it can take weeks, or it can take
yeah.
months. But it's swinging that mindset round, and we are there to walk alongside you, to be there, to enable you to do that. It doesn't happen overnight, I can guarantee that.
So anyone can find themselves in this position. There are organisations like yours that can help support, guide people through that process, and hopefully to come out the other end and be positive and get back into life. What can we do as individuals? How can we recognize the signs in our friends or our work colleagues? Are there things that we can do? If we do notice something's not right, how do we handle that if we see someone going down a path that we think this might not end well? Or if we know someone that is at that real low point, what can we do? How do we manage that?
So, I mean, people talk about signposting. I don't like using the term signposting. I like to talk about facilitating engagement because that's a more proactive activity. Um, so it's about finding out who can help in your local area? Just learning about the charities, the support that's going on in your local area. So if I'm going to stay somewhere because I can't help myself, if I'm going to a city or somewhere and I see somebody who's homeless on the street, I like to prepare myself because if they're begging, I won't give money. So I don't give money directly to individuals, but I will prepare myself and say, okay, I can give you a bit of advice, a bit of information, share a bit of information. These are some services that might be able to help you. Often people say, "Well, I know those services. They won't help me." Blah blah blah. Well, have you tried this other one? In some cases, I've actually stood there and rung a service in a different area and said, you know, I'm standing with somebody, I work in the homelessness, sector, just wondering, this is his name, he's let me share it. Are you able to see them? And normally 99% of the time, they, "Oh, yeah, yeah, get him to come, we know him," or, "Yeah, we'll get him to come down." So it's about finding out. In terms of that's purely around homelessness, but in terms of things like mental health, it's about encouraging people to talk. There's phone lines. I mean, there's so much sort of now online you can do. There is online NHS apps. There's lots of help you can give, but it's really trying to sort of not give people hard advice. I saw a wonderful TED talk about advice monster, and I'm terrible at it. Someone comes to me with a problem, I want to solve it. And actually you can't. The only person who can solve it is themselves, but you can give them information that they can then digest in bite-sized chunks or leaflets or,
Yeah,
just so it's there. Just
yeah.
be there. Be there and get them to be kind to themselves.
How are we best to respond to people that we see that are homeless, especially on the street? How do your clients wish that we would respond when we see them?
I mean, there's two parts to that. I mean, obviously, if someone's sitting there quietly begging, or quietly, you know, sitting there looking quite obviously hopeless, um, you can't. Don't ignore them. Smile, eye contact. Um, you know, just say, "Are you aware of some of these services? It must be really difficult for you." But I think one of the things that is a common thing is that people feel invisible, and when you feel invisible, you lose all self-esteem. You have no respect for yourself. So often people who are, sitting on that sleeping bag in that doorway just feel they're not visible. So make them feel a bit visible. I mean, I do buy people a coffee, but I normally speak to them first and then say, "Would you like a coffee or would you like a cup of tea?" And then I'll go and do that rather than you'll see people stacked up with coffees and sandwiches because that's a so to ask them, "Would you like a cup of
Yeah,
coffee?
yeah,
Is there anything I can do to help?" Do you know where the local charities are? Because I'm happy to look them up on my phone or share that with you. So there's that bit. I mean, obviously, if it doesn't look safe to do it, don't do it. Because if somebody's heavily under the influence of something, you've got to think of your self-protection. I think what I would say to people is, if you're feeling like you want to do something, try and give money to your local homelessness charities because we are the people that are out there. We know everybody. And I can guarantee we know every single person who is in the doorways and those behind doors in temporary accommodation and those who are sofa surfing and living in the vans and living in the cars. We know them all. And we can, through those donations, mobilize, be agile, and make sure they have access to the right services at the right time with the right support. We train our staff. We learn how to approach with people. We learn how to diffuse difficult situations. We work with the police. We work with street wardens. We work with the councils. We are a collaborator. So if you can help support charities and keep us going, it means that we can actually do so much more. And we work with over 1,000 people each year across Arran and
yeah,
Chichester.
yeah.
People wouldn't think that, but there are that many people across Arran and Chichester each year who find themselves homeless.
What kind of numbers are we looking at nationally in terms of homelessness?
I mean, I think they reckon that on any one night there's about 7,000 people sleeping rough. I mean, so you've got to look at the homelessness figures. I mean, you're looking at in the hundreds of thousands, but that includes homeless households. So that's how it's calculated by government, homeless households. So in terms of rough sleeping, there's over 7,500 sleeping on the street each night, which is pretty poor for this day and age. Um, so yes, couple of, 250,000 people are homeless each year. But that'll include families as well. So it's it's a growing trajectory. We know that it's grown significantly since 2010. A number of key programs were shut down in 2010, and that growth has been year on year. Although we did have some success, it was the good thing that came out of COVID. We got everybody in, which was fabulous. The sad thing is that once COVID ended, everybody went out. So we did get some wonderful success, but then we saw the cost of living impact change. We will see it again. We know that there's going to be a huge impact at the moment in April, bills going up, rents going up, salaries not going up. We know that that will be a big impact. So we will expect and are predicting to see many more people coming through our doors because they simply can't afford to live. In terms of trajectory, I mean, it'll all be on government websites, but actually the reality is it's shooting up at the moment.
Yeah. Well, Hilary, thank you for shedding a little bit more light really on homelessness and trying to understand a little bit more about it. Just a closing thought from yourself.
I think the big thing for me is it can happen to anyone. And no one is immune from it. And we see that, and I've seen that over 40 years. I've seen everybody from every walk of life happen to. When it does happen to you, seek help. There are people around, charities around that are absolutely vital and are there for you and actually can give you that opportunity. So I'll take an example. We have 2 trustees who have lived experience, who've come through our services. And we have one of them particularly had been homeless on and off for a very long time, and as a result had got significant addiction. Came through our services into our and worked through into our recovery service. When he was in our recovery service, he had a light bulb moment. And what we were able to do is through our partnership with the university and our adversity to university course, he started university. He left school at 13, never done anything. He was in his middle age now. He went through, discovered his love for learning, his education. He'd had dyslexia, he'd got dyspraxia, but through that support and the partnership we have and the support of our services, he continued. He's now, last September, qualified with a BA Honours degree in social sciences, is now working again, supporting other people with addiction, running a service, and still remains our trustee and thrives. So actually for me, what we want to do is move from adversity to enable people to thrive. And it's so possible, and we see it day in, day out. But all it is reaching out, making sure your charities are there. So when you are in good financial situation, donate, because if you may need us, and we are there to move you through and to thrive again.
Hilary, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.